Random House Audio presents The Coffee Trader by David Liss. Read for you by Graeme Malcolm. It rippled thickly in the bowl, dark and hot and uninviting. Miguel picked it up and pulled it so close he almost dipped his nose into the tarry liquid. Holding the vessel still for an instant, he breathed in, pulling the scent deep into his lungs. The sharp odor of earth and rank leaves surprised him. It was like something an apothecary might keep in a chipped porcelain jar. "What is this?" Miguel asked, working through his irritation by pushing at the cuticle of one thumb with the nail of the other. She knew he had no time to waste, so why had she brought him here for this nonsense? One bitter remark after another bubbled up inside him, but Miguel let loose with none of them. It wasn't that he was afraid of her, but he often found himself going to great lengths to avoid her displeasure. He looked over and saw that Gertrude met his silent cuticle mutilation with a grin. He knew that irresistible smile and what it meant. She was mightily pleased with herself, and when she looked that way, it was hard for Miguel not to be mightily pleased with her too. "It's something extraordinary," she told him, gesturing toward his bowl. "Drink it." "Drink it?" Miguel squinted into the blackness. "It looks like the devil's piss, which would certainly be extraordinary, but I've no desire to know what it tastes like." Gertrude leaned toward him, almost brushing up against his arm. "Take a sip, and then I'll tell you everything. This devil's piss is going to make both our fortunes." It had begun not an hour earlier, when Miguel felt someone take hold of his arm. In the instant before he turned his head, he ticked off the unpleasant possibilities: rival or creditor, an abandoned lover or her angry relative, the Danish fellow to whom he'd sold those Baltic grain futures with too enthusiastic a recommendation. Not so long ago the approach of a stranger had held promise. Merchants and schemers and women had all sought Miguel's company, asking his advice, craving his companionship, bargaining for his guilders. Now he wished only to learn in what new shape disaster would unfold itself. He never thought to stop walking. He was part of the procession that formed each day when the bells of the Nieuwkerk struck 2, signalling the end of trading on the exchange. Hundreds of brokers poured out onto the Dam, the great plaza at Amsterdam's centre. They spread out along the Warmoestraat, the fastest route to the most popular taverns. Shopkeepers stepped outside, setting out sacks of spices, rolls of linen, barrels of tobacco. Tailors and shoemakers and milliners waved men inside. Sellers of books and pens and exotic trinkets cried out their wares. Miguel walked silently, head down against the light rain. Today was, on the Christian calendar, the 13th day of May, 1659. Accounts on the exchange closed each month on the 20th. Let a man make what manoeuvres he liked, none of it mattered until the 20th, when the credits and debits of the month were tallied and money at last changed hands. Today things had gone badly with a matter of brandy futures, and Miguel now had less than a week to pluck his fat from the fire, or he would find himself another 1,000 guilders in debt. Another 1,000. He already owed 3,000. Once he had made double that in a year, but 6 months ago the sugar market collapsed, taking Miguel's fortune with it. And then, well, one mistake after another. He wanted to be like the Dutch, who regarded bankruptcy as no shame. He tried to tell himself it did not matter. It was only a little while longer until he undid the damage. But believing that tale required an increasing effort. Now, with unknown fingers wrapped around his arm, Miguel turned and saw a neatly dressed Dutchman of the middling ranks, hardly more than 20 years of age. He was a muscular, wide-shouldered fellow with blonde hair and a face almost more pretty than handsome, though his drooping moustache added a masculine flair. Hendrik. No family name that anyone had ever heard. Gertrude Damhouse's fellow. "Greetings, Joe-man," he said, still holding on to Miguel's arm. "I hope all goes well for you this afternoon." "Things always go well with me," Miguel answered, as he twisted his neck to see if any prattling troublemaker might lurk behind him. The Mahamad, the ruling council among the Portuguese Jews, forbade congress between Jews and inappropriate Gentiles, and while this designation could prove treacherously ambiguous, no one could mistake Hendrik in his yellow jerkin and red breeches for anything appropriate. "Madame Damhouse sent me to fetch you," Hendrik said. Gertrude had played at this before. She knew Miguel could not risk being seen on so public a street as the Warmoesstraat with a Dutchwoman, particularly a Dutchwoman with whom he did business, so she sent her man instead. There was no less risk to Miguel's reputation, but this way she could force his hand without even showing her face. "Tell her I haven't the time for so lovely a diversion," he said. "Not just now." "Of course you do," Hendrik grinned widely. "What man can say no to Madame Damhouse?" Not Miguel. At least, not easily. He had difficulty saying no to Gertrude or to anyone else, including himself, who proposed something amusing. Miguel had no stomach for doom. Disaster felt to him like an awkward and loose suit. He had to force himself each day to play the cautious role of a man in the throes of ruin. That, he knew, was his true curse, the curse of all former conversos. In Portugal he had grown too used to falseness, pretending to worship as a Catholic, pretending to despise Jews and respect the Inquisition. He had thought nothing of being one thing while making the world believe he was another. Deception, even self-deception, came far too easily. "Thank your mistress, but give her my regrets." With reckoning day soon upon him and new debts to burden him, he would have to curb his diversions, at least for a while. And there had been another note this morning, a strange, anonymous scrawl on a torn piece of paper. "I want my money." It was one of a half-dozen or so Miguel had received in the last month. "I want my money." Hendrik gazed at Miguel with the special pity men of the middle rank reserved for their superiors. "Madame Damhouse told me to inform you that she will show you something, and when you set your eyes on it, you will forever after divide your life into the time before this afternoon and the time after." The thought of her disrobing flashed before him. That would be a lovely divide between the past and the future, and would certainly be worth setting aside his business for the afternoon. However, Gertrude loved to play at these games. There was little chance she meant to take off as much as her cap. But there was no getting rid of Hendrik, and urgent as his troubles might be, Miguel could make no deals with this Dutchman lurking in his shadow. Best to have this over with, he decided, so he sighed and said he would go. With a sharp gesture of his neck, Hendrik led them off the ancient cobbled street and along the waters of the Rozengracht, where the new houses of the newly wealthy stood on either side of the murky water. Miguel had once rented the better part of so fine a house, red brick and steeple-gabled, but then Brazilian production of sugar had far exceeded Miguel's expectations, and in an instant prices collapsed. A great man of the exchange as instantly became a debtor, living off his brother's scraps. Once they departed from the main street, the area lost its charm. The neighbourhood was new. Where they stood had been farmland only 30 years before, but already the alleyways had taken on the decrepit cast of a slum. "To what sort of place are you taking me?" Miguel asked, hoping to find a reason to excuse himself. "A miserable sort of place," Hendrik said. Miguel opened his mouth to voice an objection, but it was too late. They had arrived. Though he was not, like the Dutch, inclined to believe in omens, Miguel would later recall that his venture had begun in a place called the Golden Calf, surely an unpromising name. They climbed down a steep and viciously low-ceilinged stairwell to the cellar, a little room that might comfortably have held 30 souls, but now contained perhaps 50. Across the tavern, Miguel saw Gertrude sitting at the bar, pretty as a tulip in a dung-heap. When Miguel stepped forward, she turned to him and smiled, wide and bright and irresistible. He could not help but return the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?